These two are forming quite the series, aren't they? We've got a Rose Bowl win for the Buckeyes. We've got a national championship game 10 years ago. We've got recent wins by the Ducks as top 5 regular season teams. And then, of course, an upset in Columbus a few years ago. And wow, another Rose Bowl in this one with a college football playoff bid. And who knows, maybe a de facto national championship, depending on your perspective. We'll hear from Spencer. He's giving me one of these. Hey. Spencer, Locked On Ducks, Locked On College Football. Good to see you, man.
Yeah, you too. I mean, it could be, but I'm not going to sit here and say that, whichever team wins, I think on paper is the best team in the field. Games aren't played on paper, at least last time I checked, unless they've changed that. If we're switching over to just having people play it out on EA College Football 25, then Oregon's going all the way this year, no questions asked.
Well, there might be some broadcasting networks that would rather do it that way, possibly, or just
play it all out hypothetically. Yeah,
rely on their own power index to tell us who the best teams in college football are.
Yeah.
When they first got to it, of course, at Autzen Stadium, flip a coin in regards to who the best team was. And I know we had this conversation, and I just rewatched the first half. Wanted to get through the entire game this morning, but only made it through the first half. And I got to say, wow, that's what I'm coming up with. I'm looking at this. I took down the Oregon defensive lineup. And of course, Jeff Bossa was just back in the lineup at that point. Jordan Birch missed that game, and I can't get around this one. I thought for much of the season that Ohio State was the best team in college football. They, in a sense, looked it against Tennessee, but I cannot get around Jordan Birch back in the lineup against a depleted Ohio State offensive line.
Yeah, it's one of the matchups that I was watching most closely, the matchup I was watching most closely in the Ohio State-Tennessee game, and why I thought Tennessee would pull the upset is Tennessee's defensive line's been really good. They've got James Pierce, of course, leading the way, or had James Pierce, I should say, because he's going to go be a top pick in the NFL draft. But, I mean, the guys up front, they were good. They were really good, and yet they didn't sack Will Howard a single solitary time, and that's after Ohio State lost Seth McLaughlin to an injury, no relation, but great last name. No surprise, he's a great football player. And, they've just done a really good job of shuffling things around. Both these teams, both offensive line coaches, Mark, deserve a ton of credit because of the way they've battled through injuries and had to move guys around and figure out what the right puzzle pieces are. And you're going to see at least 3 guards play for both of these teams, and I don't think that's a super common thing. You usually say, it's a starting 5. Got your 5 guys up front. Well, both teams have just showed a propensity to, that guy looks a little tired. All right, let's throw another guard in there. That guy's not playing very well. Let's throw another guard in there. Or, I don't know. I don't know how those decisions get made exactly, but I think that for Oregon in this game, the defensive line has to be able to pressure Will Howard. If you don't do that, those receivers are too good. You can't take a quarterback, even though Howard's not a top 10 pick like Michael Penix was, and it looks like, no surprise, he's going to be a good NFL quarterback as well. Oregon last year in the Pac-12 title game, their biggest problem against the Huskies, they couldn't pressure Penix consistently. And if you give NFL receivers that much time to get open, they're going to get open. It doesn't matter how good your secondary is. So that was the biggest problem for Tennessee. They couldn't get to Will Howard. Oregon has to get there, and on paper, Mark, they should be able to do that. They got to him a couple times in the first matchup. They didn't have Jordan Birch, and Ohio State's offensive line was healthier than they are now. But sometimes games just get weird. They get strange. They get funny. But certainly that's one thing that if Oregon is going to hold Ohio State under 30 points, I think the team that does that probably wins the game. They've got to be able to sack him a couple times or at least cause enough pressure.
The rematches tend to be much different looks than the first game, but this is a game in which I could see the rematch being very much in line with what we saw the first time around, at least in regards to the close proximity of the two teams and the scoring being in the low 30s. You just mentioned that it's impossible for Oregon to cover those guys. The one thing that I was impressed with in rewatching in the first half was that they did tackle those guys in space. Abuka, Jeremiah Smith. The Oregon secondary did a great job of tackling in space, but the same thing could be said about the Ohio State defensive backs trying to cover the Oregon wide receivers, because that was a tougher chore for them in the first matchup.
It was. I mean, both quarterbacks were really good. Will Howard had his first 300-yard passing game of the season on October 12th, and the last one came this past week against Tennessee, and I didn't see that coming at all because Tennessee's defense has been really good. It was cold. Now you come against an Oregon team that is incredibly rested, to be sure, on Wednesday evening in Pasadena, or afternoon, evening, however you want to call it, and you've got a team that's not going to be tired from a game they played last week. But at the same time, if you can't generate that sort of pressure, which they failed to do against Penn State, Ohio State's going to be able to go up and down the field and score a lot of points. And I'm with you that I expect this game to be tight. I talked about that on my show today. I just can't see either team, seriously pulling away. I don't know what it looks like for these teams to blow each other out. They're so talented. They are so deep. They have so many strong players in every position group. When you talk about weaknesses for these teams, I think you'd say the biggest weakness is probably Oregon safeties, and for Ohio State, probably their linebacking unit. Those are relative weaknesses. Those guys are going to have solid PFF grades. Those are good players. They would start on just about every other team in the conference. These are not, players that you're begging to replace in 2025 in the portal. It's just compared to the rest of their team, they're not loaded with high-end NFL talent. But that's the standard. Ohio State's got NFL guys in the secondary and along the defensive line. I don't think they do at the linebacking unit. Oregon has defensive guys up front that are going to play in the NFL. They've got a corner in Jabbar Muhammad who probably ends up, Nico Reed could easily, with the season he's had, wind up finding a career in the NFL. And the safeties, probably not. Linebackers, maybe. So that's just the standard of roster talent that both of these teams have set. So I think that's why I see it being another close game.
Spencer, talk about a talent. Of course, we all knew about Evan Stewart coming out of high school as a 5-star. He goes to Texas A&M. Of course, they had issues along the offensive line and a not healthy Connor Wigman.
You can just end that sentence at issues, Mark.
Ish Texas A&M issues, yes.
Yes, Texas A&M had issues.
Going to have problems cleaning them up from the Jimbo Fisher era, yes. No doubt about that. But he transitions to Oregon. Huge game against Ohio State. Nice game against Penn State. But there have been weeks after weeks after weeks where he has been non-existent. Well, what's going on with Evan Stewart? How much of a factor do you see him playing?
Well, I don't know. Honest answer. I really don't know. Because as you've pointed out, he's had games where he's been huge. Then he has games where he's just not that involved. And he has had, I think, 7 games this year under 30 yards receiving. He's also led Oregon in receptions and yards in the same game 3 times. So, I'm pretty sure the number is 3. You just have to look at this Oregon offense and understand why that's a good thing, that a player of Stewart's caliber is not relied upon game in and game out because of the way the offense is called, because of the way Dylan Gabriel executes it, and how good Tez Johnson is. That guy is as tough of a cover. Both of those guys are premier route runners. And I know Tez is tiny by NFL standards. I have a hard time seeing how he doesn't at least make a roster somewhere because he's just dynamic with the ball in his hands. And he is such a tough cover, particularly in space if he gets a free release. And, Stewart is the same way. And I think, Stewart's upside in the NFL is probably greater, but at the college level, Tez Johnson has been the better receiver so far. And his best game, by the way, Evan Stewart, came against Ohio State. Why? He got open. Well, he's had plenty of opportunities to get open. He's made some huge plays for Oregon this year. He's been their best downfield threat as a wide receiver. But Dylan Gabriel looks to Tez Johnson first. And sometimes he looks to Terrence Ferguson, the tight end, second. And then he gets to Evan Stewart. But how often do you get to your third progression in the offense? But I think it's a luxury and a good problem for Oregon to have, to see a guy who could be a day 2, day 3 NFL draft pick be able to be an afterthought in this offense, but the offense still succeeds. I'm pretty sure he had 0 receptions in the Big Ten championship game against Penn State. That's a top 10 defense nationally. Oregon scored 45 points. Why? They got a bunch of weapons. They've recruited that position and loaded up at the pass catchers really well over the last couple of years. And I talked to Jake Butt of the Big Ten Network about this ahead of the Maryland game. And he said, when Gabriel drops back to pass, yeah, Tez is the leading receiver, but I always feel like I have no idea where Gabriel wants to go with the ball. And I think that's absolutely correct. A lot was made a season ago, and rightly so, about how cerebral of a quarterback Bo Nix was. And he, made a lot of calls at the line, and he always made the right reads and such. I don't know that Gabriel is getting enough credit for how he does that, because he is just making the right reads. If when Tez Johnson went out of the game, Evan Stewart had a bunch of catches, Trayshawn Holden had a bunch of catches. And then against Wisconsin, there was plenty of Evan Stewart when Tez Johnson wasn't available. I mean, they just have an option, a counter. You take away this guy, we go to that guy. Evan Stewart drew, I think, a lot of A.J. Harris, the NFL caliber corner from Penn State, in that Big Ten championship game. You want to take away Evan Stewart? Fine. We'll go to Tez Johnson for, 12, 13 catches and 180 yards. So I think it's a good problem to have, that you have people wondering. And I've had Oregon fans wonder as well, like, where's Evan Stewart? This guy is a mega talent. What do we have? What's happening here? Nothing's wrong. That's just how the offense operates.
And if Trayshawn Holden, being an athlete, has some extra saliva, that he's got to direct that toward the ground.
Ground only. I hope he learned. I know he learned his lesson there. And Todd Blackledge was calling that Oregon-Ohio State game, and he made, I thought, the best and simplest point about that incident, which was, this is the game of the year. What are you doing? You didn't just hurt your team. You take yourself out of the game of the year. Oregon ends up having to settle for a field goal instead of potentially an opportunity to score a touchdown. Now, you can't guarantee what would happen. Ohio State's red zone defense was great in that game, and they have been great all season long. But you just push your team back 15 yards, and then they, get some of it back and make a short field goal and such. But frankly, I kind of forgot about that series of events and what it led to until just now. And that's just one example of how Oregon won the game, but really did not play their best game of football. Their best games of football this year, start to finish, I thought were Oregon State was really good. Purdue was very good. Illinois was probably the best, since it was the highest caliber opponent of all the teams I'm about to list. And don't get me wrong, they played well against Ohio State, but they made a lot of mistakes. Illinois, they played very mistake-free football. Washington as well, they played very mistake-free football, aside from Noah Whittington's fumble, which they held to a field goal try anyway. I think it was a field goal try. I don't know. There's so many plays that have gone on over the course of the season, but Oregon has had complete games, and Ohio State was a good enough performance. I don't know if good enough is going to be able to be good enough against this Ohio State team if they play as they did against Tennessee, because they're a really talented bunch. And yeah, I got a recalibration of what their floor is when Michigan went into the Big House and stunned them. But their ceiling has always been the same, and we saw that against the Vols. So Oregon can't afford to have empty red zone trips, miss an extra point, spit in a guy's face. Like, you can't afford those sorts of things in this spot. They got away with it at home and escaped, but I felt like if that game had been played in Columbus or on a neutral site on October 12th, they would have lost. So I think Oregon will have to play cleaner in this one.
Yeah, the Holden play came on what would have been a first and goal at the 9, and then it turns out to be a field goal attempt. So maybe a -4 on the scoreboard for Oregon on that trip. So in watching the Big Ten championship game, my takeaway from that was that Oregon was decidedly better. It was an interesting game. It was fun to watch. It was exciting. Drew Aller kept Penn State in the game. They made a valiant comeback, but at no point in the game did I feel Oregon was threatened seriously.
Not even when Penn State had the ball with less than 2 minutes to go, down by 8.
Yeah, I just never. Maybe it's the James Franklin And I don't pile on him as others do.
No.
I think he's a capable coach. I think he's really
He's
good.
clearly
at what he
a
does.
capable coach.
Yes, he's really.
The James Franklin slander is crazy to me. Like, it is fair to look at his coaching record and say he has not had success in big games. Okay. But against everyone else, he has had resounding success for a long, long time. Believe he got to Penn State in 2014,
Yep.
15, somewhere in that sort of range. It's been about a decade that he's been there, and all he's done is win. He hasn't won Big Ten championships or a national championship. By the way, he's got a college football playoff win. Does anyone want to give him credit for that? Well, they beat SMU. Who made SMU look bad? Penn State. Penn State, like, they have just not been able to ascend to that next level. But I think especially after this season of college football, Mark, coaches who do what they're quote-unquote supposed to do should get a lot more credit. Dan Lanning has never lost to an unranked team as Oregon's head coach. Now, a lot of people might brush that off and say, well, it's Oregon. He's got a great roster. He do this. I just watched Alabama lose to Vanderbilt and Ole Miss lose to Kentucky in the same football season, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of unranked wins over top 10 opponents, Northern Illinois over Notre Dame. It's a lot harder than you make it out to be, and for James Franklin to have been so consistently, not just good, dominant against teams that he should have a better roster than is really impressive. And then the other side of that coin is they lose this year to Ohio State. They lose this year to Oregon. They lost last year to Michigan at home, the whole running 20-something straight times and whatnot. Not a great look. To be sure, by the way, Michigan won the national championship. So, what I look at with Penn State in these games, they're not getting trounced. They're not miles away from being there. They're just not quite. They're climbing these rungs on the ladder, and let's say there are 20 of them. Penn State is on the 18th bar, but because they keep losing to teams that are on bar 19 or 20 or are at their destination, Penn State gets the perception of being down as a number 11 or 12 bar team, and that's not what they are. I've been impressed. I was down on Penn State during the year. They have changed my opinion of them. I think they can make the national championship game, Mark. I really do. Now, they trailed by 18 against Oregon and had to fight to come back, but they did. They were competitive with Ohio State start to finish and just lost in a couple of key moments. But I think they're going to beat Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl. And then whether it's Notre Dame or Georgia, I think they can beat either of those teams with how they are playing. And they will face, we shall see, in the national championship game. So end of Penn State rant.
Well, I don't disagree with anything that you just stated. But based on logic and extending your argument to Ryan Day, you would have to ratchet that up a couple degrees, or on your analogy, a couple bars, because what he has accomplished at Ohio State and the level of play has been exceedingly better than Penn State.
Yeah, I think if James Franklin is on the 18th bar of that ladder, Ryan Day's on the 20th, and he's only got one more thing to do, and that's get off the ladder. That's the only thing left for him. The Ryan Day slander has certainly been warranted in certain spots. I'm not an Ohio State guy. I'm wearing this green and yellow shirt with a big O on it on my chest. So I understand that component of it and what it means to lose to Michigan and all of that. But think about this. Ryan Day is a 50-yard field goal away from, in all likelihood, winning a national championship. 2 years ago against Ohio, or against Georgia in the semifinal, before Georgia went and thrashed TCU, Ohio State lost the game by 1 point. By 1 point. And yet you'll have people say, he can't win a national championship. Really? Really? Were you the Jim Harbaugh can't win a national championship crowd? I bet you were. I bet you were in the camp of Georgia's not going to be able to beat Nick Saban. I bet you said that too. Just because it hasn't transpired. Like, if the Michigan thing, it's being a prisoner of the moment for Ohio State fans. Because if you were to give me a 5-year window of Ryan Day coaching against Michigan. And I said, I win $100 if Ohio State wins one of those games, and you win $100 if Michigan wins all 5. Which side of that bet do you want to be on, Mark? Do you think he's going to lose to Michigan forever? Do you think he's completely incapable of winning a national championship when he has been to a national title game, lost a close semifinal in 2019, and had an opportunity if his kicker had been able to make it's a long field goal, to be sure. I'm not saying that's completely on the kicker, but I mean, if a guy comes through and makes that kick, we might be saying he has a national championship right now. So I think the frustrations with Ryan Day are just about Michigan. I don't know that they're about anything else. I really don't. Like, Ryan Day is a really good coach. Newsflash. He's like 49-1 against everybody in the Big Ten, not named Michigan. Well, he's got to beat Michigan. Do you think he knows that? You think he's got an idea, an inkling that he should probably, I don't know, beat the Wolverines sometime? Yeah, I bet he does. And guess what? He will. He will. Like, everybody relax. People said similar things about Dan Lanning in Washington. He goes 0-3 against DeBoer with a trio of 3-point losses. If DeBoer had stayed at Washington, do you think Dan Lanning would just lose for, if they both stayed at those spots for 10 to 15 years, you think Lanning will go 0-15 against Washington? That's your take? Okay. You want to have that opinion? You go for it.
Spencer, I got a couple of years on you, but I'll bring these two names to the forefront. Bobby Bowden and Tom Osborne.
So yeah, I got that. Bowden, Florida State, Osborne, Nebraska. I'm a college football historian.
I know you are. And 11 years it took after the 2-point failed try in the Orange Bowl, where Nebraska had what was supposed to be the best team of all time and lost to Miami. It took another 11 years, and that was 5, 6, 7 years of losing to Oklahoma time after time after time after time. And Tom Osborne kept his job and won a national championship 21 years after his first season at Nebraska. It took him 21 years. Now, nobody's giving Ryan Day 21 years, but now Tom Osborne's looked at as, untouchable. Bobby Bowden, untouchable, but it was wide right. It was wide left. It was this loss and that loss to Miami and other teams in postseason play or in regular season matchups that cost him year after year after year after year.
Everybody was ready to run Jim Harbaugh out of Michigan. The COVID year, it was a disaster. I mean, they were under 500. They lost to Sparty and Ohio State in the same year. And then it was just, or no, they didn't play Ohio State that year. They lost to Sparty and somebody else that they shouldn't have lost to. And
Rutgers. No, they beat Rutgers. Cade McNamara came off the bench and beat Rutgers. They lost to Penn State. They lost to Sparty. They lost to, they were 2-4.
Yeah, well, anyway, Whatever. It was a bad season. But I think what fans don't understand is not just what it takes to build a national championship level team and roster and culture. That takes more than a couple of years, generally speaking. It also requires a bit of bounce of ball luck, 50-50 coin flip sorts of games. I mean, in every single sport in the playoffs, a team loses because this shot goes in or that one doesn't, and all of a sudden, that shifts the dynamic around a team or a program entirely. Think about Raptors, Sixers, Game 7, 2019. Kawhi Leonard hits that ball, shoots that ball, it hits the rim like 3 times and goes in. What if that shot never goes in? Those are the sorts of things you need. That Sixers team had Joel Embiid and Jimmy Butler on it. They were awesome. They took the future NBA champs to Game 7. Of course they could have won it. But sometimes you just need those things to go your way. A guy making a field goal. This guy not dropping a pass. I mean, it's just time and again. I don't think people give enough appreciation to that. I just go back to that Ohio State-Georgia game. If that guy, now he hooked the field goal. I mean, it was knuckling hard left, never had a chance. But what if he hits the perfect one and he makes that field goal? That one play could completely shift your perception of Ryan Day.
Yes. Oh, it would. If he had a national championship right now, Absolutely.
But he's been that close. He's been that close to it. And people want to believe he can't ever get there. It's not as if he was that close to it
Yes.
18 years ago. He was that close to it within the last 5 years. Like, what are we doing?
I am right there with you. I am right there with you. Same kicker actually hit one from basically the same spot on the field, about 4 yards closer earlier in the fourth quarter. So it was a reasonable attempt to make, but he can't.
I mean, it's not a chip shot to where you go, oh my gosh, the kick. If we just had a kicker, like, nah. How many college kickers can make a 50-yard field goal consistently
with that kind of pressure?
Yeah. 2?
It's
a small number.
It was a tough spot to be in. No question about that. And I did not find it comfortable to be in the place of an apologist for Jim Harbaugh, but I was right there with you in 2020. I was talking Michigan fans off the ledge about Jim Harbaugh. Look at what he did at Stanford. Look at what he did with the 49ers. Look at what he's done to date at Michigan at that point, taking over a 5-7 program. He's a really good football coach. He has an Ohio State issue. They're getting there. It's going to happen.
They got there. I mean, imagine in the midst of, the bad spot in Columbus against Ohio State and the block punt, like all those games where Ohio State, squeaked out a win and just kept getting by. Imagine telling Michigan fans that day, hey, one day, this Harbaugh guy, he's going to win 3 in a row against Ohio State. They would have laughed you out of the room. They would have laughed you out of the room. I'm not here to tell you that if you lose those rivalry games, it shouldn't sting. It should. That's why we love the sport. It's great. But when you look at all of those, you have to be able to compartmentalize. We're losing because sometimes the sport is hard and it kicks you below the belt as a fan, or we're losing because this guy has shown he's not capable of getting it done. If Jimmy Lake had stayed at Washington, he might never have beaten Oregon. For however long he stayed there. Oregon had a 18-game winning streak against Washington going into 2016 or whatever it was, 13. I don't even remember what the number was. Like that sort of streak. Because you looked at him and you went, wait, he lost to Montana? Are you kidding me? He lost to Montana? What's going on here? And everything else that was going on around the program, that was a sign of, okay, this needs to go. But Jim Harbaugh is winning 8 to 10 games a year and coming up just short against Ohio State. And people are going, he's never going to beat Ohio State. Yeah, okay. Good take, guys. Good take.
Things happen. Well, Spencer, before we let you go, do you anticipate anything happening in this game that maybe other people aren't anticipating, or that we did not see in the first matchup?
I think both offensive coordinators are going to be deep into their bags. I think you will see maybe trick plays, but just formations, concepts, and ideas that didn't come about. When you give good offensive coordinators time to prepare, I don't think there's a lot that opposing defensive coordinators can do, because the number of new looks that you can show to the other side is far more myriad on offense than it is on defense. And certainly defensive coordinators will try to mix things up, but really defense is about adapting to what the offense is doing. You have a game plan that's centered around what the offense is doing. The offense is dictating the terms. So both these offensive coordinators, in one way or another, want to dictate the terms. And I think Oregon has shown a greater propensity to be balanced on offense than Ohio State has this year. But Ohio State also just leaned into what everybody outside of the program could have seen, has seen all year, which is you should be able to run the ball better than you have with those two running backs, but your offensive line is banged up. It has been great. You have legit receivers and a good quarterback. Throw them the damn ball. And they lined up against Tennessee and said, we're just going to throw you the ball. I'd expect that same sort of mentality from the Buckeyes to come into play of, you know what, who cares what it looks like? We're just going to go out and win the football game. And I think both offensive coordinators will get this point total over. I think the total's 55.5. somewhere in that sort of range. I bet you it goes over in that game, because when you have good offensive coordinators that have this much talent going both ways, it's just really, really hard to stop.
Jordan James in that game more consistently, 6-7 yards over and over and over.
Yeah.
With Travion Henderson in particular, it's feast or famine with that offensive line. They will do nothing for 8 consecutive carries, and then boom, he's off to the races for 30. And that's what it was. That one particular drive, he had 2 huge runs against the Ducks, the second one for a touchdown. So, yeah, feast or famine for the Buckeyes. Obviously, you got to run to keep the defense honest. But, yeah, they got to let her fly and throw it down the field. One more real quick. The Penn State game, anything, my other takeaway from that game in the midst of the Penn State comeback was super impressed with Drew Aller. He's grown up so much as a quarterback, and we've seen it the entire season, but it culminated in that game and showing off an NFL arm where he used to be timid about, really threading the needle. And number 2 was Katron Allen in particular, just running like a madman in that game. Was there anything on the Ducks side of that? Was that just exceptional offensive play in the second half by Penn State, or did that raise concerns for you?
It was more in the first half. I thought the second half adjustments were really good, but the concern level definitely got ticked up. I won't say substantially, but noticeably enough for me, because I saw what Penn State was doing, and I see no reason Ohio State isn't going to be able to replicate some of that. They used a lot of motion. They used a lot of shifts. Well, there's no reason Chip Kelly, with extra time to prepare, can't say, hey, we're going to run the same base concepts and blocking schemes, but we're just going to throw a little motion. Oregon's eye and gap discipline combined with open field tackling led to big gains in the running game for Penn State. They also had miscommunications in the secondary that led to some big passing plays, including one of their touchdowns. So I think that is among the top things in my head that stand out is, boy, Oregon's got to be able to shore that up, because if not, I've seen Chip Kelly use motion plenty of times, and if that's all it takes to, throw off the defense, then you're going to have a long day on that side of the ball. Because if Ohio State, gets incredibly balanced the way Penn State was able to be, they've got better talent on the perimeter. They could score more than 37 points as the Nittany Lions did. So Oregon's got to be better up front, but they have to be able to adapt to, a heavy motion and shift looks from an offense.
Okay, everybody, Spencer's a must follow. You've seen it on the banner the entire show. In addition to that, Spencer, anything people need to lock in on, pardon the pun, with you and everything that you've got going on leading up to this one?
Go T-Birds. Go T-Birds.
Oh.
I'm the primary play-by-play announcer for Southern Utah University on ESPN+. So if you're ever looking for a good college basketball game, just sit down and listen to. Throw it on in the background. I don't care. T-Birds are playing every week. They're off on Thursday, but this Saturday against GCU. So that's everything that I do. But yeah, Locked On Ducks, Locked On College Football on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, as well as many of you I'm sure know. But yeah, it's I hope it's going to be a joyous reaction show that I'll do on Wednesday. I'm just ready for the game to start. The waiting is the worst.
Yeah,
the waiting is the worst. Whether I'm going to be thrilled with the outcome or back into a state of postseason mourning to try to get myself excited about new transfers for 2025 and why that'll make it this season and whatnot. I'm hoping it's the first one, but I don't know. This just feels like a coin flip game to me. I think it's going to be awesome.
I'm right there with you. Spencer, good to see you. Enjoy the game, and we will see you soon.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, man. Spencer McLaughlin, there you see it. Locked On Ducks, Locked On College Football. I have dropped the link in the chat. I can go run and do other things for the Voice of College Football or talk Rose Bowl, Georgia, Notre Dame, whomever else. We are simulcasting, of course, on the Ohio State channel and on the Oregon channel. And I just found out here in the last few minutes, our Oregon guys are going to be live here at some point, and our Ohio State guys are going to be live at some point here this afternoon, this evening, tonight, whenever that's going to be. But we had Spencer McLaughlin, so I wanted to go live with Spencer. We did drop the call-in line there, but evidently all of you were too shy to talk to Spencer and myself. But you can certainly join me if you've got anything to talk about concerning this matchup or college football in particular. I'll give it one more go on the call-in line and see if you guys want to chat. I am working on a few different pieces here. Ohio State, Oregon, common opponents, working on that. Now, of course, they played each other, so that kind of throws out the common opponent factor, or does it? But we're going to look at common opponents, Ohio State, Oregon, and of course, the first matchup. I started watching the game this morning, and I watched the first half, and I'm taking a ton of notes on the first half of the first game at Autzen Stadium on October 12th. So be looking out for those 2 Rose Bowl preview videos. Of course, on the Georgia channel, the Notre Dame channel, tons of previews on those games. We knocked out a Penn State, Boise State preview on the main channel as well. Check that out. Texas as well, taking on Arizona State. We just did our Big 12 look on the Big 12 live show a couple hours ago. Michelle Gardner, Arizona Republic. So we are previewing all these games full throttle. Disputed National Champions, that's the book. The link's in the description section of the video down below. You'll love the book. That's all I got to say. You love college football. You're a college football nerd. You're a junkie. You will love this book. It's only $9.99. The link's in the description section of this and every video. All right. Apparently nobody is looking to call. Any comments, questions, anything? Don't see anything. We are good to go. Leanne Herring and myself with the transfer portal update coming up at 7 p.m. Eastern time tonight. Looks like I'm off to watch Iowa and Missouri play some college football and catch up with all the bowl games that I missed over the last 5 or 6 days as I was celebrating with my family. USC and Texas A&M in particular. I want to see what happened there. All right, folks. Appreciate you being here. Lock it in here at the Voice of College Football. Please subscribe, hit the like button on your way out, and call in going once, going twice, going 3 times. All right. We will see you very soon, meaning, wow, we're on the cusp of New Year's Eve. We'll do the post-game, New Year's Eve post-game after Penn State, Boise State over on the main channel, taking your calls. And then, of course, post-game following the 3 huge college football playoff matchups on New Year's Day on the main channel call-in show. So give me a call New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, right here at the Voice of College Football.